We've been introducing candidates to Zoom for 4 years.
Been preparing all of us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, welcome everybody for our second interview of the day. I'm Rhonda Walker. I'm chair of Our Revolution Washington Bernie-Kratz Coalition, and
I'm Courtney Love, the vice chair of Our Revolution Washington Bernie-Kratz Coalition.
We are joined tonight with Jessi Murray. She is running for state rep for Washington State Rep in Legislative District 43. Welcome, Jessi. Please introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure. So thank you for having me. I know that these can sometimes be long days with candidate interviews and everything, especially when there's a lot going on outside of that right now. So my name is Jessi Murray. I use she, her pronouns. I am running in the 43rd district, which is one of two districts that's entirely within Seattle. So it is Capitol Hill and then a bit north. So Capitol Hill, some South Lake Union, East Lake, Montlake, up through the U District, and then kind of over through Fremont and a little bit of Green Lake. So really a lot of the heart of Seattle. I'm running for state representative because it is time for a new direction. We live in a city that has been changing. We live in a city that has embraced progressive politics for a while, but we haven't had leadership that has necessarily matched that in the 43rd. And so I'm running because there are some really urgent issues that need attention right now. I'm a renter. I have experienced the cost of living going up and up and up in Seattle. My little brother tried to move here at one point, wasn't able to find any place that worked for him as a working class person that he could afford, that would rent to him with his credit history, etc. He ended up living on my couch for 3 months and then gave up. He moved away to Olympia and then to California. And if we're going to have a vibrant city that works for everyone, we need to make sure that we can house everyone. I'm running because we only have so many years left to make real change in climate action. We've had a few key bills go through, but we've had several ballot initiatives fail, and our emissions up until going into COVID at least had been going up year over year despite our goals. And so, especially as someone who's younger, who, many of my peers, my brothers are facing decisions about whether to have kids or not, wanting to make sure that our planet is habitable in the next few decades is really important. And then, I'm someone who has fought, especially for LGBTQ rights, for reproductive rights, and especially in the intersection with those areas in healthcare for more than a decade. In my role as the co-chair of the Seattle LGBTQ Commission, in my community organizing roles with Seattle Clinic Defense, in coalition on behalf of the Northwest Abortion Access Fund, in the Hero Coalition, and others. And we know that not only are we at a point where it's absurd that healthcare is coupled to employment, given that we're in a public health crisis and people are losing their jobs and thus insurance. But even before that, we were facing major issues where, I was a person who had pretty decent healthcare, and I faced huge amounts of medical debt after I had a couple of underlying conditions that I didn't know about that decided to spring up out of nowhere. I was able to barely weather the financial storm. Many people would not have been able to. Without the support of my family, I probably wouldn't have. And that's not something that we should subject people to. Beyond that, we know that LGBTQ folks have trouble getting healthcare. We know that there's racial disparities. There are disparities in gender and care. There's so much at stake in healthcare that we really need to make sure that we're keeping our neighbors healthy, because as we see right now, it makes all the difference. And so, like I said, I'm a renter, I'm a queer woman, I'm reliant on public transit. And I think that we can't wait to make the big systemic changes that our state needs to no longer have the most regressive tax system, to radically reimagine the criminal justice system, to bring lenses of equity to decision making, and frankly stop trying to approach everything with an incrementalist mindset. People want change, and that's why I'm running. I want change too, and I decided to step up and say, let's do something about it.
Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry. Courtney unmuted herself, so that means she has something to say. Go ahead. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, one, I want to check in. Is my connection all right?
Yes.
Yes, it seems so.
It might be a little low on
Okay.
your side, but it's coming through okay.
Okay. I couldn't tell if the distortion was my receiving or somebody else's sending. So I wanted to check in. Let's see. I'm very, in listening to your answer, I'm very impressed with the various aspects of intersectionality that you've experienced and exposed yourself to. In this time of current upheaval, where do you, Campaign Zero is reflected in our questionnaire, but it is not so current to reflect the 8 Can't Wait, and nor does it discuss the scope of the discussion versus reform and abolition of police. Can you tell us a little bit where you stand in this current situation?
Sure. I think so from the city perspective, which I would have less control over as an elected official, but I think is very relevant to the discussion. I think that we need to be defunding the police at least 50%. I think we need to be working towards reinvesting that money in especially Black and Brown communities, moving basically every aspect of policing that we can get out from under the police to social workers, to community advocates, to addiction specialists, to whatever the particular service is. I think there's a lot that we need to do to radically reimagine what community safety means. And I think most of it does not involve the police. I think there's a lot that we can do at the state level as well in terms of, one of the things that's come up over and over with protesters is that we have all these bail funds, and we know that cash bail is a huge issue in terms of criminalizing poverty. Folks who haven't necessarily faced a trial are often held just because they can't pay for bail. So I think eliminating bail as much as we can, eliminating any funding for private prisons, I think reducing incarceration as much as possible. Obviously, there are always going to be some folks that fit within the definition of the worst of the worst, but I think as much as we can, moving towards restorative justice practices, more community engagement. Incarceration is really a legalized form of slavery, and we need to reduce it as much as possible.
Yeah. And to make you more comfortable with that answer, my mother is incarcerated, and I think she needs to be. And at the same time, ideologically, I think we need to abolish prisons.
Yeah.
So
there's tension there, because obviously there are, I think we should abolish prisons, we should abolish the police. Obviously there are going to be some extreme situations where we need something akin to what we have, but still radically different.
There are certainly solutions out there that I think the conflicting feelings I have can be resolved.
Yeah.
So I am just not a scholar on that subject. So I look forward to finding those answers. You mentioned healthcare in the things that were very important to you and what motivated you to get involved, specifically around the inequalities. And are you familiar with Whole Washington Healthcare Trust and Senate Bill 5222 that's currently in the Senate and needs a House sponsor?
I believe so, yes. That's a path to essentially single payer healthcare in Washington state.
Yes. And so I hope that you research them and endorse them. They'll make a lovely meme welcoming your endorsement. They cannot endorse you, but as a candidate, you can endorse them. The funding is completely covered in the bill. So it goes above and beyond the bill that's been in the legislature for about 12 years, languishing.
Mm-hmm.
And that the funding is already in there. It means that the bill that Inslee supported, the Cascadia Care, that bill did not provide us with a public option. It provided the money for the study for $200,000, but Whole Washington has already done that study for $20,000. So I hope that you look into that and find it aligned with you and that you can throw your weight behind it.
Absolutely.
Yes. And then Rhonda, do you have a question?
Sure. So with the Washington Bernicrats, our revolution, one thing when we first started, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, that we all agreed on without hesitation that we get behind is any kind of anti-corruption work or election reform work. So we do ask in our questionnaire regarding the American Anti-Corruption Act, and if you sign on to that. But another big piece that isn't necessarily a part of that when it first was formed, but is now, is the Citizens United piece. So a big thing that we watch and look at are donations, and whether or not they're being backed by big corporations or big super PACs, because we believe that one does tend to be more open to laws where the money is coming from. So how do you plan, or how are you fundraising, and how do you plan to fundraise? And do you plan on taking any super PAC money or PAC money from groups like the fossil fuel industry or the pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies? Can you kind of go into how you feel about that piece?
Yeah, so I have explicitly said I'm not taking any corporate money, any corporate PAC money, any fossil fuel money, or any money from police guilds. I am a strong believer in this. My opponent, Frank Chop, has actually taken quite a lot of money from many of these sources. And he justifies it by saying that, you know, he gives the excess money to the Democratic Party and it helps elect people in swing districts. And I understand that argument, but I disagree with it. I think it still results in ultimately a situation in which you are less accountable to grassroots organizing, less accountable to community, and lobbyists are going to expect something from you. And so right now, my campaign is people powered. I have exactly one contribution that is not from individuals. It's from a PAC about supporting women running for office, which I am okay with certain progressive causes, PACs, as long as they're not corporate, fossil fuel, etc. But I have one contribution from a PAC, and then I have over 400 individuals who have donated to my campaign. We have been on track to hit our primary goal of 80K with those donors. Many of them are sustaining donors. And I think that's important. I think it's important to have someone who has grassroots connections, who has accountability to the community. I mean, if I can't raise money because the community doesn't support me, then I shouldn't be in office. And I will hold true to that.
Oh, thank you. You actually gave me chills. That was a great answer. Another piece is really
Rhonda is easy for anti-corruption. That's all I'm gonna say.
yeah, but it gets me quite, yeah. I do believe that, you know, the anti-corruption work, the work that needs to be done has to come kind of, you know, local. So I know you're running for state rep, but I mean, I believe like, you know, city, county, you know, it all needs to change from the bottom on up. And
there's a lot more that we can be doing at the state level to reform campaign finance in general. The fact that Frank Chop was able to enter this race with $70K already in the bank from previous years, even though he's taking the no fossil fuel money pledge this year, you know, he took money last cycle and that's where that money came from. And so it becomes, and then that makes it harder for progressives to actually run on people-powered campaigns. And so there's a lot that we can do around surplusing, around all of that.
Right. And another piece is I know the counties kind of run elections, but it would need to be a state, goes to the state legislator on bringing in like a ranked choice voting system, which we need statewide for sure. I know that some things can be done through county, but how do you know about ranked choice voting, and what do you think about that type of a system?
Yeah, Fair Vote Washington actually just recognized our campaign last week as a ranked choice voting champion. So I am all for ranked choice. I think that's how we escape the constant question of the lesser of two evils, and start to really be able to express how we feel as voters without risking throwing away our votes. So I'm all for it.
Excellent. Beautiful. What other things do you think that you could do as a legislature to help our democracy here in Washington State?
Yeah, so I think there are, you know, Washington has a lot going for it in terms of voting reform, but I think there's a lot that we can do, especially around allowing incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people to vote. Just because you are incarcerated doesn't mean you shouldn't have a say in what sort of funding the schools for your children gets. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have a say in what representatives are doing about climate action. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a say in what your own criminal justice system is doing in general. As much as I hope that we can push to reduce the incarcerated population as much as possible, I think we also need to recognize that folks who are incarcerated need to have the right to vote. Beyond that, I admittedly need to do a little more research into what reforms are looking at in terms of voting rights. But I suspect that there are certain reforms around allowing potentially folks who aren't citizens but who are green card holders a say in state elections, even if they can't necessarily vote in federal elections. There's potentially more that we can do for funding allotment, for outreach, for especially rural communities, for communities on reservations, communities that are at risk of coercion. Because even though vote by mail is especially great at opening up voting to a number of populations that may not have been able to get to the ballot box during the one day during working hours, there is the increased risk of folks with disabilities, folks in abusive relationships, who have caretakers et cetera, who could be pressuring them to vote one way or another. And so I think that there's probably more that we can be doing in order to fund programs that combat that sort of thing. But again, I would be open to more suggestions on this. I know our democracy is strongest when everyone can have a say and not have their opinions. I think there's a lot that is being done at the Seattle city level around trying to limit the influence of, say, Amazon money. And I would love to see what we can do in that regard at the state level as well, because we don't want corporations flooding our elections and buying representatives.
I think those are really good starts, and I'm not sure that we have anything yet to add to those suggestions. But if we do, we'll pass them along.
Yeah, for sure.
I do have a list of things that the Washington Bernie-Kratz Coalition kind of came up together with. And it's kind of programs that you think, should it be not socialized, privatized or a public service? So we can just rattle off in public, private, you can say, combo. And then if you have to say something about it right then, go ahead. We can also come back to any of them that you're passionate about at the end. So we'll just start. A couple of them are gimmies. Healthcare.
Public.
Postal service.
Public.
Schools.
Public.
Prisons.
I mean, public, but
gone.
Fewer.
Social Security, the distribution and investment of.
Public.
Foster care.
Public.
Childcare.
Public. We should have universal childcare.
Utilities.
Public.
Water.
Public.
Internet and cell service.
Public, and we need to have it in more of the state. It should be available everywhere.
Public lands and natural resources.
Public.
Banks.
We should have a state bank.
Mass transit, airways, railways, ferries, buses.
Obviously, there's going to be some amount of private services on there, but I think we need robust public investment in transit and ideally free transit.
Excellent. Infrastructure?
Public, private combo.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Military and its associated industrial complex?
I mean, let's reduce that as much as possible. I don't think we should have private, Halliburton running wars for us kind of under out of sight and out of any sort of accountability. I think we need to significantly reduce the amount we're spending in war and the war machine. But what we have should be public.
Excellent. The Veterans Administration?
Public.
Scientific funding?
Ideally, that would be all public. I think right now we rely on some big philanthropic efforts. And honestly, that means we should be taxing those people more. So we need more investment in scientific efforts, but it should be more of it public.
Excellent. Space exploration, like NASA, not Space Force.
Sorry, I still can't believe the Space Force is a thing.
That's why it's not part of the question.
Yes. Yeah, we should have public investment in that. I think there's a place for private companies in that, but I think we need to also have robust public investment.
Excellent. Libraries?
Public.
Elections?
Public.
First responders,
Public.
legal services,
I think that's going to be a combo. Again, I think we need to significantly up our investment in especially public defenders.
excellent. Housing,
As much public as we can get. I think that's going to be, again, a combo, though.
excellent. And then how do you feel about UBI and caregiver? We mentioned in the questionnaire caregivers basic income. This was formulated well before Yang got in the discussion and made UBI far more universally understood concept. So during that pre-social acceptance time, we were talking about at least a caregiver's basic income, which would be covered in a jobs guarantee UBI combo. So about that.
So I think UBI is a great policy to pursue. I don't actually like the way that Andrew Yang went about it, because his was basically, let's replace every other piece of the social safety net with UBI. And as someone who relies on her health insurance quite a bit, I wouldn't want to give up, say, healthcare benefits and just get a stipend. I think we need to at least be looking at caregivers, as well as significant reform for folks who are disabled, because right now there are huge issues with how much an assets people who are disabled can have, and sometimes that even keeps them from getting married. But I think especially as we look forward to a world where there's probably going to be a lot more automation, there's going to be a lot, jobs are going to look different. There's definitely a place for UBI, but also we should just make sure that people have enough money to not worry about being evicted. So
Yeah.
yes, I think we need to at least start with caregivers, and there's a lot of space to move on from there.
Right. So something at the state level, we have a state law against rent control. Where do you stand on rent control and just cause evictions?
Yeah, so I think that we should be doing something similar to what Oregon did, where they put in a rent stabilization law that capped rental is rent control for the state. Gonna start that sentence over. I think that we need to get rid of the ban on rent control, and I think that we need to have a statewide cap on rental increases that I think Oregon's is something around 7%. So it's still fairly big, but it gives places like Seattle the opportunity to go in and crank that down more if it turns out that that's what's needed. But more so, it just makes sure that no one's going to get a $300 rent increase next month. Like, honestly, that happened to my brother in March, I think. So right when the pandemic was starting, he had to abruptly find a new apartment because his landlord just ratcheted his rent up. That was actually illegal, which shows how not only do we need to have these laws in place, but we need to have robust support for, I think not only do we need more support for, say, public defenders, we need more support for lawyers to help tenants with tenant protection suits. And so I don't think rent control alone is the answer. I think we're going to need a suite of changes in terms of like rezoning, in terms of investment in social housing, and other pieces. But I think that rent control is a big piece of it. Homeowners already have rent control in their mortgages. Why shouldn't renters have the same stability that homeowners get?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we need to tighten the weave on the social safety net for sure. Rhonda?
I was going to see if, so Jennifer has joined us, and I want to give Jennifer an opportunity if she has a question for Jessi. I'm not sure if she's able to unmute or not, but I want to give her a moment to do so. Okay, she might just be here listening in, but Jennifer, if you do end up wanting to ask a question, just go ahead and jump in and let us know, or type it in the chat, and we'll be happy to ask that for you. So Jessi, what do you see as the most, let's say the top 3 issues in your district that you plan on, are your main tackles when you're in there? Top 3 for just your district itself.
Sure. So my district is heavily renters. I think it may be one of the highest renter districts in Washington. And so there are it's a varied district, but there are portions of it where 80 to 90% of folks in those precincts are renters. So I think I didn't actually answer your question on just cause eviction. I think we should actually move to good cause eviction. And so we need to be doing more to ensure that folks can find housing, they can stay housed, and they don't get priced out of the district. They're, in a lot of ways, that ship has sailed for many in my district, but we need to stop gentrification in its course as much as possible and start to reverse, especially through programs around folks who have lived in the community, having priority for social housing, things like that. There also are significant numbers of the district who are reliant on public transit. And so one, I think we need to stop investing in car-based infrastructure. We shouldn't be widening our highways, especially when we're in a climate emergency. And we know that it doesn't provide congestion relief. But we also need to be fixing the issues of funding public transit that were caused, by I-976, and really by decades of neglect. There's so much more that we could be doing with transit. We should have free transit. We shouldn't have transit cops harassing especially young racial minorities for fare enforcement. It's bullshit, to be honest. And I think that under all this, there is the question of the tax system, and that may not feel the most connected to the day-to-day lives of people in the district, but so many of one, we're in an issue with COVID, where because our extremely regressive tax system is so reliant on sales tax revenue, we have a huge budget hole. 2, we have just an equity problem where the lower rungs of earning, those folks tend to pay 17, 18 or so % of their wages in taxes, whereas the top brackets pay 3% or less. There's so much more that we could be doing just to make sure that people aren't being priced out by taxation, that they're not spending their whole paycheck on sales tax, that they're not facing rental increases from property tax increases. And we need to tax the rich. we need to tax the rich to fix the budget hole for COVID, but we need to tax the rich to make the investments that we need for the future in education, in a Green New Deal, in housing, in healthcare. We have some of the richest folks in the world, I think in my district, but at least in my city.
I believe Washington has 14 billionaires.
Every billionaire is a policy failure. And we should be not relying on philanthropy, especially from folks who have shown that they're not interested in philanthropy. And we should not be relying on platitudes like renaming Key Arena Climate Pledge Arena or whatever crap that is. We should actually be taxing wealth that has been fundamentally created by the investments that we've made in this region, in public transit, in infrastructure, in our education systems, so that folks, want to live here, and using that to make sure that everyone who wants to live in the city can live in the city. Everyone who works in the city can live near where they work, and that we're not leaving anyone behind. And so tax reform might seem a little wonky, but it's a big part of this.
No, thank you. That is important, and we don't shy away from that discussion. I'm surprised. We haven't been doing vetting interviews a lot lately until just now, so we're out of practice. You caught us. Because our tax system, we can't do a progressive tax. Our state constitution says only a flat tax on income, and then most of the state thinks we're not allowed to have income tax at all.
Yeah, there's so many ways you can get around that. There's capital gains, there's a wealth tax, there's even the way that our constitution makes it so like gas tax revenue goes to highways. Well, one, gas tax is at this point essentially a regressive tax because poorer folks tend to have less efficient vehicles and have fewer electric vehicles. But two, not being able to spend that on transit is also an issue. So moving to like a vehicles miles traveled or road usage charge, something like that, there's a lot of ways where we can make our tax system more fair before we even attack the income tax. And I think that we should fight for an income tax because I don't think even though there are legal challenges, they're not insurmountable. We just need to make the case and build coalitions and get people on board.
Excellent. That's the kind of stuff we like to hear.
Yes, we do. We are getting close to an hour, so I do want to just make sure that you have an opportunity to hit on the key pieces that you want to make sure that people do understand about your race and what's important to you. So, take this opportunity to make sure that, everybody gets to hear about you, and then I'll check in with Courtney before we get ready to get out, but go ahead and make sure you get everything that you want people to know.
Let us know where to find you.
Yeah, so like I said, we're a people-powered campaign. We have significant numbers of folks who are ready to donate and volunteer, but we'll always welcome more. So my website is at elect Jessi Murray, and it's spelled like it is in the little Zoom thing, JESSIMURRAY. In addition, on social media, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram with Jessi Murray 43rd. I'm running against an incumbent Dem who has been way too moderate for the district for a while, but power has kept him in place. And to be honest, there there are several ways where establishment groups are trying to put their collective thumb on the scale. But I think we have a real opportunity here to not only get the message out that progressive change is needed, I think that I have a real shot at actually winning this seat, especially with help from folks like the Bernie-crats, to get through the primary and get all the way to Olympia. I think that we have an opportunity to send a young person, to send a queer person, to replace a landlord with a renter. We can do this, and we can start a movement in Olympia to say, we don't want incremental change anymore. We don't want big momentous change to only come from ballot measures. We expect the legislature to do more, and they can. I think that it's our time. We're at 2020. Obviously, volunteering and campaigning looks a little different right now, but we're going to be doing lit drops soon. We have window signs, and honestly, just letting people know about our race is a big deal. And so we welcome any support that you would give. I also have a platform up on my website that's electjessimurray.com/vision, but it's very much a platform that is informed by the people. And so we're actually going to be doing a revision probably this weekend based on feedback that we've heard around some early childcare and early learning pieces, some voting rights pieces, and especially building out some of our criminal justice reform pieces to really continue to refine and let that be a living document. So if you have any feedback on that, things that are missing, things that aren't quite right, things that you just want to make sure that we continue to champion from here to Olympia, send us an email. Our email's on our website, but it's info@electjessimurray.com. And we check every single email. Sometimes I will even text you back, and we will listen to your suggestions and try to make the most robust, progressive platform that we can. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessi. And thank you all for watching and being a part of this progressive movement. Go ahead and hang on real quick, Jessi, while I end this. Thank you all, and see you next time.